Great.
So welcome everybody to the Technoscience Thursday webinar. My name is Julie Hinderer. I'm the Science Programs Manager at the Great Lakes Fishery Commission in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Thanks for being here. So just some brief info about this webinar series. Our goal is to keep fishery managers up to date on emerging technologies. And this is actually the last of 6 webinars that we have held during the first half of this year. All the webinars have been Thursdays at 2 p.m. And if you want to see recordings of past webinars, you can visit the webinar series webpage. There's a QR code there on the left side of the slide. And Renee will also be dropping some links into the chat for everyone. So I encourage you to check out the past webinars if you missed them. And then even though this is the last webinar of this kind of initial series, we've had a pretty good response from folks. And so I think we'll probably be continuing these in the future in some form or another. And so if you don't want to miss any future announcements, make sure you sign up for our listserv. That's the QR code on the bottom right there. And Renee will be dropping a Typeform link into the chat as well. So you can input your email and make sure not to miss any announcements. So since this is the last webinar of this series, I just wanted to kind of circle back and revisit why we're here. So this project was developed through the Great Lakes Fishery Commission's Science Transfer Program. And this program seeks to identify management needs of fishery managers in the Great Lakes, and then make information more accessible for them to help with their decision making. And the program really emphasizes two-way knowledge exchange. And so linking up knowledge producers and knowledge users in working on projects together. And so typically the projects that we support go really in depth on a particular issue or topic. And we do things like host workshops, create decision support and data visualization tools, and things like fact sheets as well. And so these technoscience webinars are a bit different in that we're kind of doing mini science transfer for 1 hour on a particular topic. But this is an opportunity to have a dialogue, and then identify areas that maybe might benefit from future sort of more in-depth science transfer efforts. So if you want to learn more about the science transfer program, there's a QR code there on the slide and a link in the chat. And I encourage you to reach out to me anytime if you have ideas for projects. We do have funding available, and would be happy to talk with folks about your ideas. So last slide, just some Zoom etiquette before we get going. Please do mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And then if you have questions or comments for our speakers, there's a couple different ways that you can do that. So you can drop questions and comments in the chat by clicking on the chat button on the taskbar on the bottom of your screen. And we will be monitoring chat throughout. And then you can also raise your hand and ask a question verbally. So if you click on the React heart-shaped button, then there should be a raise hand option under there. So without further ado, I will stop sharing and introduce our speakers. So we have 2 speakers today. We did have 3 speakers slated, but unfortunately one of them had to deal with a family emergency. So keeping him and his family in our thoughts. We do have Dr. Will Atlas will be speaking first, and he's a Salmon Vision Collaborative co-founder and a salmon watershed scientist with the Wild Salmon Center. And then we have Dr. Spencer Greening, Lagut, who is a Tsimshian anthropologist from the Gitga'at First Nation of the Pacific Northwest Coast. And Dr. Greening is also a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Victoria. So Will and Spencer, thank you so much for being with us today, and take it away.
Thank you, Julie, and thanks, folks, for joining today. We're super grateful to have everyone in attendance and excited to share the presentation with y'all. As Julie mentioned, my name is Dr. Will Atlas, and today I'll be co-presenting with Dr. Spencer Greening. And we were meant to present with William Housty as well, but unfortunately he has a family emergency. So he asked me to give a few of the slides and some overview of the sort of Celtic Nation specific focus on this work. And what we're going to be sharing today is an update on a cross-border US-Canada initiative that we're co-leading called the Salmon Vision Collaborative. This work really aims to harness the power of artificial intelligence to advance more rapid and efficient analysis of salmon population monitoring data and to deliver in-season insight to partners, including the Gitga'at and Heiltsuk First Nations, that can advance Indigenous and local leadership towards adaptive fishery management. And so we thought, let's talk about the technology, but let's also have some community partners and leaders on the ground doing this work to really come in and provide the context for why this work is, relevant to their nation's stewardship objectives, and what their vision for the future is. So first, a little background. I mean, many of you work in the Great Lakes region. You may have spent time in Canada's Pacific region or in Alaska. And one of the fundamental realities and constraints to monitoring and managing salmon is that they spawn in thousands of watersheds around the Pacific Rim. Fisheries harvest fish returning to these rivers, often with very limited information on their population status. At the best of times, there aren't enough resources to monitor salmon everywhere that we need to, but this is especially true in an era of government austerity and in the United States, reduced federal funding for salmon conservation and recovery. Climate change is also making salmon returns more variable, making it difficult to forecast returns pre-season. And this is a challenge since in most cases we don't collect information on the abundance of returning salmon until after the fishing season is complete. This unpredictability leads to increased conservation risk in years when abundance falls below forecasts and can limit fishery opportunities in years when salmon returns are higher than expected. Around the Pacific Rim, salmon populations are commonly monitored using a number of different technologies, including sonar, video, and overflight counts. The image here on the left shows a sonar beam scanning across a river, and migrating salmon appear as a few pixels moving across the screen, requiring reviewers to undertake time-consuming reviews to count the number of salmon moving in an upstream direction and manually measure fish using a set of outdated and proprietary tools. On the right side of the image, you see the Quay River Weir, a salmon counting fence operated by the Heiltsuk Nation in the lower Quay River. At the weir, salmon migrate upstream until they encounter the fence and then swim through one of the two video boxes. When they migrate through the fence, a motion detection algorithm records a short video, allowing technicians who review these videos to produce annual counts. But these monitoring approaches are challenged by the time and cost associated with reviewing the data. And this challenge is personal for me since starting in 2014, I've worked with the Heiltsuk Nation to run the Quay River Weir. And when we transitioned to video counting in 2021, I quickly realized that the single greatest challenge to the success of the project was going to be getting the video reviewed and producing a reliable count. So I started talking to computer scientists at Simon Fraser's Net Media Lab about computer vision deep learning AI tools that could automate detection, tracking, and identification of salmon to quickly produce counts from the 5 months of video that are generated in Quay every year. And the more I talked to folks working in salmon conservation around the region, the more I realized we were not alone in this challenge. Many monitoring programs were struggling every year to get their data reviewed and to produce an estimate of how many salmon returned to their watershed. So in 2021, we started working with Simon Fraser University and our Canadian NGO partner, Pacific Salmon Foundation, alongside a group of 4 Indigenous nations with a grant from the BC Salmon Innovation and Recovery Fund to develop and test computer vision models that could automate analysis of video and sonar counts. And then building on the success of those 2 years of initial work, we received another major grant from BC SRIF in 2023 to support model refinement, scaling up applications, and the development of the Salmon Vision web app, which I'll share with you later. And while we've been really laser focused on, the mechanics of computer vision counting and building the infrastructure and expertise to implement these tools at scale, our goals are not just to produce counts. Rather, we think this work can help catalyze a broader change in how we manage and conserve wild salmon populations. There's a real and urgent need to empower local and Indigenous communities with in-season information on the status of salmon populations returning to their watersheds. Far too often, decisions about salmon harvest and allocation are made by managers with limited understanding of the populations or local communities that are impacted by their decisions. There's also a powerful opportunity for these tools to support a transition to terminal and selective in-river harvest, driven by timely and reliable data on population abundance. We believe these efforts can bolster the long-term resilience and health of ecosystems and cultures that salmon sustain and improves food security and livelihood opportunities for people in these watersheds. We're also inspired by the opportunity to take a different kind of approach to developing AI, centering the process of co-development with local and Indigenous partners to create a trusted set of tools that provides real benefits to partner organizations and to salmon ecosystems. And why wouldn't it work? AI tools are rapidly transforming society, from large language models to deep learning that can process vast quantities of spatial or genetic data and produce novel insights. But salmon conservation, being a relatively small industry, has not attracted the type of focus from the big tech companies currently pushing the AI envelope. And when we went out and looked at what tools were available for automation in our video data review process, we found basically nothing. And this really highlighted to me the challenge associated with the quote unquote AI revolution. Big tech and their investors have been laser focused on the arms race to produce large language models that will dominate knowledge collation and are betting big on artificial general intelligence. But in this landscape, many less profitable, but nonetheless important opportunities for AI to support human and ecological well-being have remained unmet. So this created a really unique opportunity for our team to build AI tools that could help automate and expedite the data review from hundreds of monitoring programs running annually around the Pacific Northwest, and to co-create these tools with Indigenous nations, conservation practitioners, and government agencies. This process of technology co-development was really born out of the belief in the power of braiding knowledge systems, building AI that works synergistically with indigenous salmon weirs, channel spanning fences that have been used to harvest salmon sustainably for thousands of years, to empower local communities with timely and reliable insights into the health of their salmon populations. And so the Salmon Vision Collaborative was born in 2021 as a kernel of an idea, but with a clear vision toward a future where data review could be automated to provide information in season and to reduce the staff and resource burden associated with reviewing these data. And the Salmon Vision Collaborative really is a diverse group, from Canadian NGO partner Pacific Salmon Foundation to the Simon Fraser University Net Media Lab and ecological tech company Lumax. We share a view that AI tools for salmon conservation offer transformative potential. Importantly, this work also wouldn't be possible without the First Nation partners who have contributed to the co-development of this technology and who spend several months every year running these on-the-ground assessment programs. And I just want to give a shout out to the partners that we have on the slide, including the Kitasoo Stewardship Authority, the Haida Nation Fishery Program, Taku River Tlingit, Gitniao Fishery Authority, New Halt Nation, Heiltsuk Nation, who you'll hear from today, albeit with me as William Housty's proxy, the Skeena Fishery Commission, the Wichino First Nation, and of course Gitgat First Nation, who Spencer will be speaking on behalf of today. And so, initially our work focused on two of the most common monitoring approaches that are taken, video and sonar. But our partner Lumax has also been working in parallel on computer vision tools to automate salmon detection from aerial drones. And they brought that expertise and tool set when they joined the partnership in 2023. So there are really three, fundamental goals that underpin this partnership. The first is to build trusted, affordable AI tools that can accelerate the delivery of monitoring data to conservation practitioners around the Pacific Rim. The second goal is really about building a community of practice, connecting conservation scientists, indigenous communities, and natural resource agency staff to tools and knowledge sharing opportunities. Basically, we want to get these people talking outside of their regional or project silos and sharing information on the best practices in our field to really upgrade and standardize the approaches that we all take to monitoring salmon populations. And then our third goal, and something that we're working actively on right now, is to scale the access and application of AI tools in fisheries conservation around the Pacific Rim, but really around the world. And we believe that's, fundamental to transforming towards locally empowered, data-driven decision making. And so what does it look like? Well, what you're seeing here is a video of Chinook Jack swimming through the Bear River Weir, a project that's run by the Skeena Fishery Commission. And you can see that track that's being produced by the computer vision model, essentially showing where in the image the individual detection is moving. And then the species assignment is shown with a probability at the top left of the bounding box. So you can sort of see as the fish moves towards the center of the screen, the model becomes more confident that it is in fact a Chinook. So how does it work? We use an AI model called computer vision deep learning, where models are trained to perform detection and tracking of individual classes of objects, in our case, species of salmon. And I'm really happy to answer questions later about the specifics and the mechanics of those computer vision models, what types of models we're using, but I figured, for this talk, we'll provide a bit of a more high-level overview. So as a first step, we install a video monitoring system at a weir where a partner is aiming to automate counting in species ID. We then collect a season worth of data, or in some cases use pre-existing data that was collected in previous years. We run our motion detection algorithm and computer vision model to generate video clips and preliminary AI results. These AI results are then checked and updated as needed by reviewers. So that review process both produces a corrected count and annotated training data that our team can use to retrain the model, or in some cases, a few different models, using millions of annotated frames of video to teach the computer to consistently recognize the species of interest and to evaluate which combinations of training data in a set perform best for a given site, which allows us to fine-tune models for accuracy at that site. Then the following season, we deploy the same technology, but with a computer vision model that has been optimized for performance at that specific location, giving us the highest probability of producing a useful AI count. So far, we've amassed training data sets of more than 2.5 million annotated frames of video and sonar across a constellation of projects that we're working on. And these data are a really big and important asset, allowing us to train new models and evaluate their performance at both new and existing sites. And I just wanted to show you another video of fish swimming through a video box because, to me, this is what it's all about, is seeing the fish in their environment, making an accurate count, really understanding the timing, behavior, and abundance of these salmon populations that in many cases were not monitored before, a local First Nation really took up the mantle and began to lead this work. So to enable rapid scaling up of this work, our team designed edge computing systems, basically compact GPU and CPU processors that can run motion detection and AI counting algorithms right on the river's edge, managing file uploads and data summaries to provide regular updates to local partners. And throughout this process, we've learned a ton about, what it takes to train and implement an AI model for salmon monitoring, but also how best to deliver these tools in remote field environments where issues like weather, power supply, and difficult access for troubleshooting all come into play. And I should emphasize, these places are often very remote, typically accessible only by boat, helicopter, or float plane. We've had to design these systems to be resilient to a range of rugged conditions they'll be confronted with, from brawling rainstorms coming right off the North Pacific to pissed off grizzly bears. Our team and our partners have really confronted a huge range of challenges associated with working in these incredible watersheds. And I will say, importantly, we're also very open to working in less remote watersheds. Certainly, the technology has immense utility and upside in more accessible places, and having grid power and broadband internet would honestly be a welcome luxury. In remote watersheds, our edge systems are typically powered with off-grid solar and a large battery bank, and are connected to satellite internet, allowing remote access for our development team for troubleshooting and continuous uploading of data generated on the edge. These motion clips and AI results are then uploaded to the cloud via satellite or broadband internet connection. And we found last year that in approximately 80% of all the motion videos the AI produced, 80% of all the motion videos that were produced on the edge, the AI produced the correct count for how many salmon of each species migrated through the weir. And our sonar model is also achieving around 80% mean average precision in detecting and counting salmon. So, one of the ways that we often evaluate model performance is using these confusion matrices and mean average precision. Mean average precision is basically, it's a metric of model accuracy that includes both correct counts, false positives, and false negatives. And it creates this aggregate score that is meant to really reflect how reliably the model is detecting different classes of objects. And so what you can see here for a confusion matrix generated for our most recent family of models, we're getting about 97% mean average precision for coho salmon, about 86% mean average precision for sockeye salmon, and generally doing pretty well detecting these different species of salmon that we've trained the model to identify. And of course, we have other species as well, including lamprey, pike minnow, whitefish, a variety of freshwater species. And that list is actually always expanding because as we deploy the model in new locations, we're sort of capturing new components of freshwater biodiversity in our video set. And so we envision this to be sort of an ongoing iterative process, building training sets. And this R&D work towards developing, network-connected off-grid systems for AI processing have really started to yield results for our team and partners. The edge systems put the power of AI in the hands of local practitioners running AI models on site, and producing actionable insights without reliance on cloud computing. Working with manufacturing partners Ocean AID in Canada and Whoosh Innovations in the US, we started to scale production of these edge systems and associated monitoring infrastructure, like the video boxes pictured here being delivered and unloaded by the Sitka tribe of Alaska fishery staff. Both of our partners can produce an edge computing powered camera system for around 5K, and Whoosh builds the video box and edge processing system for only 10K, creating an affordable and scalable tool for video counting that can be accessible to partners, anywhere starting now. To put that in context, a typical video system like a vacuum counter with less AI functionality has traditionally costed upwards of 50K. So we're really trying to push down the cost of video monitoring infrastructure and AI counting tools so that they can be applied at scale. And these manufacturing partnerships will be really critical to our success, supporting the rapid delivery of infrastructure to new partners as we scale around the region, and really providing, valuable collaboration in research and development, design and marketing. So it's really, sort of a collaborative effort to build and scale this work out, and we're grateful for those partners. Now, the latest piece of the puzzle is the Salmon Vision web app, which we soft launched with a small group of long-term partners in 2024. The app was designed with input from Indigenous Nation staff and other conservation practitioners, and it builds on an Label Studio open source code base, but with several elements that we added to improve functionality and adapt it to our use case, and a layer of sort of organization, project, and user creation that maintains secure individual access for partners. Those motion clips that are generated on the edge from RGB video or sonar programs are uploaded via satellite or broadband internet, and then can be reviewed and corrected as needed. And so when a video review is saved, as I mentioned before, it produces both an updated or corrected species count, as well as training data that we can use for future model refinement. And for folks who have worked in AI, you know that, one of the core challenges is getting a robust training set that's representative of the sort of diverse object classes that you're trying to detect. And so it's really exciting to us to be able to merge these two fundamental objectives, one being evaluating model performance and correcting the results based on those insights, and the other being the annotation of new training data for ongoing model updates. And we think the web app can create this really powerful positive feedback loop where, we're generating millions of new frames of training data annually that can continually improve our computer vision models that underpin this work. And we're really already seeing the benefits. So we're expecting an additional 1 million new frames of annotated video and sonar to be generated by the end of this summer. All this progress is really exciting. And in 2025, our AI tools will be running in 16 watersheds with an additional 14 sites currently proposed for 2026. We're really excited about all these opportunities and the places, people, and outcomes that we're able to support with these tools. 2 new projects are starting in Alaska, which is exciting for us. These will be our first projects in Alaska. One at Redoubt Lake with the Sitka Tribe of Alaska, and another at the Chignik Weir in Western Alaska. Redoubt Lake, which is near Sitka, supports the largest sockeye subsistence fishery in Southeast Alaska, and sockeye fisheries there are managed under a sustainable fishing plan that was co-developed by the state, tribe, and federal governments. Unfortunately, federal funding cuts have eliminated resources for staffing and operations of the weir, and so the Sitka tribe, with support from the U.S. Forest Service, requested a grant for AI salmon counting, and we partnered on that proposal. And that initial proposal was successful. So this year we'll be piloting computer vision counting using these edge systems in video boxes manufactured by Whoosh. And we really love this project because it's directly informing in-season management of a valuable and sustainable food fishery for the community of Sitka. Salmon face a multitude of stressors from climate warming and anthropogenic habitat loss across their freshwater marine ecosystems to unsustainable marine fisheries that undermine population viability and recovery prospects. But wild Pacific salmon and so many of the fish species we all care about are also profoundly resilient. They've persisted through ice ages and supported human and ecological communities for millennia. Given the chance, they'll do their part as a foundational element of the North Pacific's ecology, culture, and economy. But to support these species through this period of unprecedented change and climate pressure, we need to focus collectively on empowering local decision makers and stewards of aquatic ecosystems to protect populations while maintaining harvest opportunities when abundance allows. Wild Salmon Center and our partners in the Salmon Vision Collaborative are aiming to harness the power of AI to catalyze a transformation in how we monitor salmon populations and how we fish. We're also excited about opportunities to expand the reach of this technology beyond the Pacific Rim and to build partnerships across Canada and the United States. Because ultimately, all this work is about improving outcomes for fish populations, their ecosystems, and the people for whom fishing is a way of life. That likely includes many of you in the audience today. So if the tools that we're building at the Salmon Vision Collaborative seem like something that could benefit your work, please don't hesitate to reach out. Julie, you're welcome to share my email after the presentation. You can also reach us at salmonvision.org through the Contact Us form. And so now I would be passing the mic to William Housty, but because he has a family emergency that he had to attend to, he asked me to present his slides in his stead. So William Housty is the director of the Healthsick Integrated Resource Management Department. He and I have worked together on the Quay River Weir since it started in 2014. He's an incredible cultural leader, both in government to government relationships, but also in the important work of the nation, in the feast hall and the big house, supporting potlatching, doing his own work in that regard. And so he's really an incredible leader with a big picture vision for how the nation can assert their stewardship of wild salmon, to build a sustainable future. So this is a picture I took flying over Bella Bella. It's the largest actually First Nations reserve on the BC coast. I believe there's something around 2,000 full-time residents, and there's something like 3,500 Healthsick Nation members. They're governed by both an elected band council as well as a strong hereditary leadership system, rooted in the potlatch. And when this work began in 2014, the nation was really focused on how they could provide some leadership in salmon stewardship. They had seen decades of decline, loss of opportunities for food, social, and ceremonial fishing, and there really was a glaring lack of information, especially on sockeye salmon populations that, continue to be really vital to food fishing opportunities for Healthsick members. The territory is also incredibly diverse. So the outer coast is a part of an area called the Hecate Lowlands, sort of low coastal hills, very boggy landscape, super tannic water, not what you necessarily imagine when you think of the Great Bear Rainforest, but incredibly important to salmon watersheds nonetheless. And then the inner coast is really defined by these mountainous fjords and the glacial history of that landscape with much clearer water, snow-fed hydrology, and a very different sort of annual thermal and hydrologic regime. And so the nation really, is struggling to monitor, manage, and steward salmon populations across a territory that's actually, the size of Denmark. And with 2,000 people on reserve, that means that there's inherently sort of limitations in the human resources and capacity to go out and do all the work that we want to do. So what are traditional Healthsick fisheries really about? Well, like many nations on the BC coast, Healthsick folks have fished with weirs, with seines, and with stone fish traps, really going back thousands of years. And there's actually, weir remnants and old fish traps that are still visible at the mouths of many of these rivers. But of course, you know, the fishery began to change quite rapidly in the late 1800s with the arrival of canneries. So this is a picture of the Namu cannery, which operated from 1893 to 1997, actually. Namu being a historic village, with remains of people that have been found going back as far as, 6 or 7 thousand years. But this cannery really sprang up in the old village site. And for decades, Heldsick members would travel to Namu during the summer and work in the cannery or work as contract fishers for the canning company. And of course, the canneries took their share. So this is a picture of a commercial fishing boat in 1922 with 22,000 chums harvested in a watershed called Nekus, which is, actually just a small creek. And today, 22,000 chums would be, in some years, more than the entire escapement of that population. In fact, in some years, it would be 10 times the entire escapement of that population. And that's all to say, you know, on the BC coast, there was really this boom and bust cycle where canneries proliferated. They harvested populations indiscriminately and often unsustainably, and they contributed to the collapse of salmon populations. Of course, this time series hasn't been updated. This is an older slide that I used, but if you looked into the present, there's actually been years when fewer than 5,000 chum salmon returned to spawn in the Nekus River. And of course, these changes in the fishery have also impacted the ways that Healthsick members get their food fish. And so not only has the cannery industry become a big part of the fishery there and actually subsequently collapsed, but sport fishing lodges have been another sort of major source of employment. And increasingly, Healthsick members themselves use sport fishing methods to harvest. But what that means is that they're actually targeting different species. So as opposed to harvesting, chum and pink and sockeye, which are commonly caught with gill nets, folks tend to focus their harvest effort now more on Chinook and coho, which are more commonly harvested using trolling gear. And of course, all these changes were also unfolding with the sort of background of a changing legal reality for First Nations in BC. And many of you will have heard of the Sparrow decision. This was really a landmark decision that affirmed that Indigenous people held the right to fish that predated the existence of Canada and therefore was a constitutionally protected right that was an unextinguished ancestral right. And so that really set the stage for increasing self-governance and co-management and led to the creation of the AFS, or the Aboriginal Fisheries Strategy, within British Columbia. And of course, the nations have also been doing their own work to build capacity for stewardship and to really lead on these files that are so important to their members. And a big part of that was for Healthsick at least, was in 2010 when they founded the Healthsick Integrated Resource Management Department, which is really, they work across the lands file, the forestry file, marine shipping, but they also do an incredible amount of work monitoring and managing salmon, groundfish, and other fish populations. And of course, sockeye salmon are among the most important traditional foods for First Nations along the BC coast, including the Heiltsic. There are more than 20 genetically distinct populations of sockeye in Heiltsic territory, and most of these populations actually lack recent escapement data or stock assessment. They've never been evaluated for status under the wild salmon policy because in most cases there's just zero data with which to evaluate their status. So in building this community partnered research program that began, back in 2013, we focused on two goals that would strengthen the scientific foundation for healthy stewardship of salmon. First, we built a community-run population monitoring program that could support improved baseline data on populations of sockeye that Healthsick target in their fisheries. And second, we wanted to draw on, what data was available for understanding the life history and habitat constraints of sockeye, and to help estimate preliminary conservation targets and shed light on stock status in this remote and data-limited region. And all of this work is sort of situated within a context of a newly inked or relatively newly inked fisheries reconciliation agreement. So this co-governance agreement between Fisheries and Oceans Canada and 9 North Coast BC First Nations has really transformed how management decisions are being made on the coast, with collaborative governance tables formed and sort of underlying technical committees formed consisting of both DFO and First Nation staff. And I'm really fortunate to serve on what's called the Central Coast Management Council on several of those technical committees, including the Benchmark Development Committee and the Coho Salmon Management Committee. So that is really transforming how decisions are being made. But of course, we need information to underpin those decisions. And that information, has not been forthcoming traditionally from government partners. Another thing that, Hermed has repeatedly flagged is that salmon returns are becoming really unpredictable. So we had a period of relatively high returns, for example, of coho salmon in the early 2010s, followed by the emergence of the blob, this sort of high pressure warm water system that formed in the central North Pacific in around 2014 and really persisted for much of the latter half of that decade. And that had really dire consequences, both in terms of the survival of salmon at sea, from smolt to adult return, but also in terms of the sort of climate that salmon experienced when they returned to fresh water. And so what you're seeing on the right is actually a picture of a massive fish kill that happened in the Nekus watershed. There was sort of an early September rain event that brought fish in, and then there was prolonged, 2 to 3 weeks of drought, and the river really dropped while there was, maybe 100,000 salmon in there, and ultimately led to anoxic conditions and a mass die-off that catalyzed a lot of media coverage and concern, but also really sort of made it clear to Healthsick that, hey, if we want to manage these populations, we want to rebuild these populations, we have to start being proactive. And so they've been working on a water storage system in a lake, a perched lake in the Nekus watershed that will release more flow into these rivers during periods of critical drought, and also developing much more sort of real-time monitoring of hydrology and climate conditions around the territory. Another big piece of making timely decisions for the Health Nation are the two weir programs that they currently run. The one on the left being the Quay Weir, which I've discussed with you previously, and the one on the right being a weir at the outlet of Tinkia Lake, a major sockeye bearing watershed about 40 minutes from Bella Bella by boat. And the nation, with an eye towards this increasing variability, really wanted to be making decisions around their food, social, and ceremonial fisheries with in-season information. And so these weirs are really set up to provide exactly that. There's two video boxes in both weirs, and then the data, as you can see, there's these Starlink dishes, out in the middle of the river, essentially, to give us better coverage of the satellite network to the sky. And then the data are streamed out using Starlink, and our updates are provided weekly to the nation during the fishing season. And this is all to say, we're seeing a lot of sockeye, and actually the last couple of years have been some of the best returns of sockeye on the BC coast in over a decade. And so it's been really encouraging to see what these watersheds are still capable of. And, the honest truth is, in a good year, they can still support incredibly robust fishing opportunities for Celtic Nation members, and in a lot of cases for non-Indigenous people as well. I mean, these territories are incredibly important for recreational and commercial fisheries opportunities as well. And so we think, this data can be part of the picture in terms of how decisions are made at co-governance tables and can really empower the Celtic Nation, the Gitga'at Nation, and so many others to lead when it comes to decision making. Of course, this technology and the monitoring programs are really inseparable from people. They need to produce value for community and for the people doing the everyday work of stewarding salmon. So on the right, you see the Kwe Weir crew, just a group of awesome people that have been working there, some for over a decade now, and their commitment to this work is really what makes it tick every single day. And I think I talk about the Koi Weir a lot because it's super near and dear to my heart, but I think it really exemplifies this linkage between community and, the efforts and resources that we expend monitoring and how, a sustained commitment to place and the people that make that place special can yield incredible outcomes. As I mentioned, the weir started in 2014, actually 2013. That's a typo in my own slide. But it was initially made of wood, so hand split cedar pickets and cedar posts that we made tripods with. And of course, that was incredibly labor intensive, prone to blowing out in high flow events, etc. So we transitioned to an aluminum weir. We're really on sort of like weir 4.0 now. We've rebuilt the weir multiple times. And the program is sort of in a much more stable and sustainable place. We have 12 years of data. As I said, we're seeing some of the best returns we've documented since we started working there. And we've worked with the nation to develop a management plan for subsistence fisheries targeting Kwe sockeye. And the other really neat thing is that herm staff harvest between 500 and 1,000 sockeye annually in Kwe when they seine. So you see them seining here on the right, and then upstream is the weir. They'll essentially block the weir off overnight, load up a bunch of fish in the pool, set the seine, and then they'll tag those fish, as you see in the left here, for mark recapture. So when the weir was originally run, we would just use it as essentially a tagging platform to mark fish, and then we would recite those fish during fall spawner surveys for a mark recapture estimate. We've continued to make a mark recapture estimate every year just because that gives us more continuity, but we also now have those real-time counts coming through the weir. The other really cool thing about that sockeye harvest at Quay is that that goes directly to community members. So it's feeding kids at the school and the daycare. It's feeding, elders in the long-term hospital housing. It's also being shared with off-reserve community members and distributed to households throughout Bella Bella. So I think, every household in Bella Bella received like 3 sockeye salmon this year from the Weir's harvest. So the community really sees a real benefit from this work, and the decisions are empowered by in-season data that wouldn't be possible without the power of AI. So what is the vision for the future? I mean, I wish that William was here because he is certainly, 10 times more charismatic to me than me, and also can really speak more authentically to the vision that Heltzik have for their future. But, if from 14 years of working there, I have any insight, it is to say that it's all about making sure that salmon can continue to be the foundation of the culture, the identity, and the food system. And so that means, really asserting Celtic governance authority and building systems of management that have that long view, right? That give back to the ecosystem and that think about, what will there be left for future generations. And so with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Spencer. And then Spencer, you can just tell me when you want me to advance your slides.
Great. And I think I'll just build on that theme. to take us home to the end of the presentation. Uh, Thanks for having me, folks. Again, I'm from the Gitga'at First Nation. I'm a Tsimshian anthropologist. And my interest, I dabble in a bunch of areas with my work, and often I'm like a research consultant at times for the nation. But my real interest lies with what it means to looking to our histories and our oral histories, our traditional laws, our governance systems on the coast, and trying to understand what it at best uh, what it means to be the best example of a human in our territories. And often, as I dive into that question with knowledge holders and elders and folks, uh, there's a lot of great, rich stories that come up that create the foundation of the laws of how we harvest and the tools we use to harvest. And I want to dive into some of those stories today. But first, I figured just to build on what Will's presented so far, here's an image of our the fish weir and the associated cabin with that fish weir in our territory. And as has been alluded to, so much of this is about reclamation of a process of harvesting that has had a tumultuous history with our province and federal government, and as well as uh, reclaiming the morals and values behind the larger cultural morals and values behind the act of harvesting, and how that ties into um, all the things from an Indigenous perspective. And so, yeah, this is we unfortunately we've only had our weir in for a couple seasons, and we haven't got some great pictures, but this is a pretty cool picture of the watershed here. It's similar to some of the one of the weirs that Will showed in his slides. Um, and yeah, a newly built cabin to house folks who are working with the weir. And this year, I actually brought my family out. So it was my wife and my 14-month-old daughter. And we wanted to make it sort of an expression of taking back that stewardship component of these places and actually living there, and being on that territory, raising children there, and that holistic approach to salmon stewardship, because salmon were the lifeblood of our people. And so, how do we continue to maintain that connection to our next generation? We can go to the next slide before I dive too deep and get off track. But I think um, one of the things I wanted to emphasize is how this act of rebuilding fish weirs, even though so much of the tools and that we might use are kind of foreign, like AI, and I mean that's mind-blowing in itself that we're using AI to monitor salmon these days, but it's still rooted in Indigenous paradigm, um, specifically uh, the things built around the stewardship that's built around the fish weir. And I often include this picture in slides because this was a house front for a longhouse, for people in our territory. And it tells the story of humans being sucked down into the bottom of the ocean by supernatural beings and ocean creatures. And during that time, they potlatched and they feasted for um, what to them felt like several days, but in the human world, it was several years. And the people were worried where they went, and they assumed they had all passed. And this when they went out to sea, and they never saw them again. But it ends up they came back, and after 4 years, they were welcomed with a big celebration and feast and potlatch. And at that potlatch, they revealed laws and ways of living with the non-human world, which encompassed many species. But it sort of sets the foundation of how us Tsimshian people and many indigenous people on the coast uh, understood our relationship. with the non-human world, and that was that they really had a position of power in how they taught us how to harvest and live and be on the landscape. And over the millennia, as we've accumulated or created traditional ecological knowledge and ways of being, there was this foundational knowing that it was the non-human world that gave us a lot of this knowledge. You can go to the next slide, Will. And so, yeah, I'm building on this idea then is what does stewardship guided by the non-human world actually mean or look like? Well, one of my favorite stories is about the salmon and how uh, uh, in our recorded oral histories, by recorded, I mean like recorded within our memory, the histories that have been passed down by our people. Uh, One of the stories speaks to a time of drought in salmon, and the a huge factor of why that drought and why the salmon runs are low is because of human disrespect or sort of lack of awareness in their handling and processing of salmon. And so the story goes that there's a lull in the fishery, and again a human is taken into the water, sucked down into the water, and taken into the spirit world with the salmon world. And he sort of meets with the each house of the salmon. In one house is the sockeye, one house is the spring, one house is the pink salmon, one is the chum, and he talks to them. And they sort of give these teachings and they lay out ways that you're supposed to harvest. And the same goes for other species too. We have this beautiful story of the bullhead teaching us how to harvest ulican, a rich, oily fish that was super necessary for survival and uh, and and trade and economics on the coast. But these methods, the nets, the tools that we use, were recommended by these species themselves. And so it takes us to a time where we're sort of at our best express our best what's the word I'm looking for? Let's say right before contact, you would see the accumulation of thousands of years of knowledge, having this beautiful representation of what it meant to live with the landscape over not just trial and error, but lessons learned from the non-human world and how humans engage in these places. And so one of the most beautiful expressions was fish weirs. You can go to the next slide, Will. And um, in this picture, I include um, a few different things. Um, I'll back up a bit before I dive in too much into those pictures, though. But uh, the fish weirs really became the sustainable sort of presented to us by the spirit world, these sustainable options on how to harvest. And along with that came ceremony and these spiritual, social aspects of the harvest too. Will was the first author on this paper that I helped collaborate on, and it describes the importance of first salmon ceremonies, these ceremonies that were often told to us by the salmon themselves that you need to do this in order to keep us healthy and honor us in this relationship as we give our life to you. And for those that don't know, these first salmon ceremonies often involve someone hanging out by the salmon weir as so spring comes and they're waiting for that first fish to show up. And as it shows up, they hook it or they net it or they do whatever tool they're using and bring it into the house. It would be the chief's longhouse. And they welcome that fish into the house as if or not as if it's an honored guest, and they bring it up. And in our culture, it's on a special woven cedar mat, and you're singing songs and bringing it up as for lack of better word, royalty, a king, a queen, or something into the house. And as you're doing that, you're chanting, "Tell your family how much we love you." tell your family to keep coming because we appreciate you so much. And then they feast, and everyone gets to eat a piece of that fish. And as that happens, in a lot of cultures, they'll take a break and let an initial wave, because that's the family that that fish called and said, yes, these people are respectful. Come continue up the river. And so you see, there's a few things going on. You can interpret that through like an indigenous lens and the cultural piece, but also a scientific lens and a stewardship and resource management lens of what this is all doing. Um, One, it's allowing these fish to go up without being harvested. So it's this initial population of the river and the spawning and escapement. But after that, there's this very thoughtful selective harvest that goes on too, where you're selectively harvesting whichever ones feel the most sustainable, potentially leaving super spawners, big, beautiful, healthy females to go by, but focusing on males potentially, which you hear a lot of by elders and folks who do this sort of harvesting themselves. And uh, and so in this paper that I really love that Will again was the first author on, and a bunch of us got to collaborate, it sort of suggests, it alludes to this idea that through tools like the fish weirs, which in our mind came from the species themselves, humans are able to engage in the environment in a way that they're manipulating the ecosystem. They're changing the ecosystem towards abundance, where their own influence can make the river more rich while also harvesting from it through selective, thoughtful harvest. And so this picture represents a few different things. This beautiful dance and mask representing the importance of the salmon in our culture. Here's what we would call on the far left is a medicine man, a halite in our language, who would be the one that um, gets these lessons from the spirit world, but also uh, uh, would do the ceremonies and lead that sort of process as the fish come in. And here's a big rock wall that I've got the pleasure to work with and do archaeology around, right near the Kikiata fish weir. And in the top right corner is this sort of um, uh, a dichotomy in a sense of me fishing on an industrial commercial fishing vessel with a bunch of food fish sockeye for my community at my feet. And so as we go to the next slide, I want to think of like where that expression of me sitting on an industrial vessel has sort of clashed with this colonial history of fish weirs and fishing on the coast. And so I throw up a bunch of pictures here too. There's the Department of Fisheries logo. There's a bunch of legal cases that have happened that are very important to recognize around Indigenous people and their relationship with the Crown or Canada around fishing. One of which, in the early history, is when that booming industry started, where it became law to actively destroy fish weirs and things that, um, unbeknownst to colonizers, were tools that absolutely helped maintain and steward salmon fisheries. They would blow up fish weirs as the one pictured, and then give people gill nets and tell them where to go fish for canneries or for whichever um, company. Like Canfisco, I threw up Canfisco up there, the huge corporation that has sort of bought up and created a monopoly around fishing and fish companies, and the commercial fishermen. Also threw up this hilarious sort of photo, was like an AI interpretation. And so while we use AI to count fish, it also brings entertainment in how it interprets commercial fishing and whatnot on our coast. Um, an unspoken part that Will sort of alluded to in this complex relationship with Canada dismantling our our tools and stewardship, our tools for fishing and our tools for stewardship of these salmon rivers, is how this plays into traditional governance in Indigenous um, sovereignty, I guess would be the right word, of these rivers and these places. That map that Will showed in the beginning of the Northwest coast, you could dial into every single salmon spawning river there, and there would be a hereditary lineage or a traditional clan house group that would have stewarded that river through things like fish weirs at the time of contact. And so you can imagine how with every salmon spawning, uh, every watershed was being stewarded in a meticulous way, and how rich and fulsome of like a data set of a fisheries, uh, the management of fisheries on the coast would have been. And so, with reserve creation, people removed from their territories, the destruction of fish weirs and these things, all of that sort of falls apart. And so, this is us trying to rebuild that on the coast. We'll go to the next slide. I can't remember when we were supposed to end. Um,
I think we got 3 minutes, so you're
okay,
good. Bring it
okay,
home.
okay. So this is the picture of what that would look like in a Git-Gat space. Is like, here's the community of Hartley Bay. Here's our hereditary um, shown here. I just love this picture because it's us opposing some irresponsible oil pipeline development. But then there's our potlatch, and it ties our feast hall, our potlatch hall, and it ties into the territory and all the rivers and how they can accumulate and turn into our entire governance system, and how they fuel our economy, they fuel our culture in so many ways. And so there's this beautiful holistic picture happening around these fish weirs and this fish science of reclaiming relationship with the non-human world in both a biological way, but also a cultural way, but also in a legal sense, empowering our traditional governance and the things we want to strive for in Indigenous sovereignty. And I don't know if there's that one more slide, I think. Um, and hopefully in all this process, we can like become closer to these landscapes and return to being the best humans uh, as best humans as possible by returning to the tools that these species gave us in our eyes, the tools that we believe they gave us, with some of these beautiful expressions of the culture and the ways that we live with this landscape that have been the accumulation of people really being in an intimate place with these species and their homes for thousands of years. So looking to the future, that's become important for me and my community is how do we reintroduce this to the youth? How do we reintroduce this to um, our stewardship departments and the broader community and the social collective? And I'll end there.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Will and Spencer. That was an awesome presentation. Yeah, I don't know if you both have maybe just a couple minutes to see if there's a quick question or two from the audience.
Yeah, I do.
Great. Yeah, I apologize, folks. I know some people might have to jump off. You can always catch up on YouTube later to see what you missed. But does anybody have any questions for Spencer or Will? Andrew.
Yeah, really cool presentation. I really appreciated your perspectives. Just a quick question. How have you found some of the elders in the communities have reacted to this kind of really interesting bringing of these high-tech tools to sort of traditional methods of salmon monitoring and assessment? I just find it fascinating that the communities are really engaged in this type of technology.
Maybe Spencer, that might be best fielded by you. I mean, you spend a lot more time with elders and knowledge holders than I do.
Yeah, I think it's totally embraced, and one of the more complex conversations. Um, to start off, everyone kind of thinks it's exciting and neat, and there's obviously hesitancy around throwing up Starlink in this wild area and whether just like a buzzing sort of Wi-Fi signal is going to hurt the animals or something. That sort of those questions come up. But the more complex sort of nuanced conversation on this is how it kind of challenges the commercial fishery in a moral and ethical way. And I think that's a real struggle, if any, um, because there's you can see a lot of these elders are born and raised commercial fishermen. And this kind of research really shows how in-river fisheries um, uh, just produce in-river fisheries that were supported and used in a traditional context really kind of challenge industrial fishing methods at its core. And so that can be a tough conversation to navigate and a nuanced one at that. And I think that a lot of elders and community members know it. It's just complex and nuanced.
Well, thanks so much, Spencer.
Mhm. Yeah, the one thing I would add is I think, I hear a lot of times from people in community, like we are innovators, like we want to create new technologies, we want to lead these technologies creation, and in sort of partnering in that work, they have a stake in it and they have a say in how it's created. And I think that is, I think created a lot more sort of trust towards it than maybe would otherwise be there because there's a sense that the nations, sort of co-own the technology and the trajectory of the technology.
Thanks. Any more quick questions, Scott?
Yeah, thank you. That was a great presentation. I really enjoyed that. I had a quick question about the collaboration itself. Just how you navigate the intellectual property that's being generated. You've got multiple private partners, and you're generating an image recognition model and an image database. And I'm just curious, how you're handling access and use of those tools through among all your partners. And thanks
Yeah,
again.
so that's a great question. That's a really important question. And so we're working on establishing data sharing agreements with all the nations that are partnered in the work. We've already, sort of set up initial data sharing agreements as a part of the sort of funding agreement that was inked at the beginning of the BC Shrimp work. And what that says is that the nations own the data, but that we're free to use it for non-commercial purposes, but that they can also remove those data sets from our training set if at their request. So essentially, it's used with ongoing consent from the nations. And as we sort of start to move towards potentially incorporating a business or commercializing this technology to be able to really support scaling, I think there's going to be, some very important conversations between the data owners, the First Nations that are partners in this work about, how do we make sure that the benefits of any sort of like commercial enterprise are flowing equitably back to those communities and supporting the stewardship work. So that's something that, we're actively thinking about, even something like a data dividend where it's like, maybe the nations own some equity in the company as a part of, allowing us to use their data, but maybe there's also just like 5% of all revenue goes to a data dividend that's paid proportional to, what percentage of your data is in the model, for example. So, and, we know how absolutely critical First Nations leadership in this work is going to be for like continuing to scale it out. That's certainly the, communities that have the capacity to run these programs and the real interest in it. And so we're trying to thread that needle between like needing, big diverse data sets to do the work well and making sure that we've got a laser focus on flowing benefit, both financial and stewardship insights back to the communities that are doing the work on the ground.
Thank you.
Great question, Scott. Anybody else? Okay, well, in the interest of time, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Dr. Atlas and Dr. Greening, for that awesome presentation. Everybody, please join me in thanking them. Yep, I see some clapping emojis. Very much appreciate your time. And yeah, everyone stay tuned for the recording, and everyone have a great day. Thanks for joining.
Cheers. Thanks so much.
Bye,
Take
everyone.
care, everyone.
Thanks, guys.